Alright, this is John Black, Super Chemist, part 2 of how to calculate reparations. And first, we're just going to go over, this first 1 or 2 videos. All we're doing is going over some facts, get some data points so that we can figure out our, calculate our reparations at the end. We need our data sets and our facts first. Okay, so we figured out that 96% of basically the entire country had no ancestors that were involved in slavery. Only about 4% of the United States has ancestors. And what's funny is all those people, that 4% of the population today, they're all in politics. They're all the elites. None of them are the rest of us. You know what I mean? So here's some more data points. 12.5% of whites were slave owners. We already said that at the beginning. But there were also 1 to 3% of black people who owned slaves. So what about them? Don't worry, when we do our math and we do our calculations for reparations at the end, all this stuff is going to be taken into consideration. We're going to factor all this in, and you'll see in my math how I factored it in. 1% of Asians were slave owners. People don't realize that. Also, what about mixed races? Like, let's say you're half white, half black, and your white side had slaves, and your black side were descended from slaves. Who? What? Don't worry, I'm going to... all that's going to be taken into consideration when we do our math. And like I said before, Hispanics, they take that percentage of people that descended from slave owners, that takes that down, like I said, you know what I mean? Whites used to be predominant in this country. Now they're like 60%. Okay, so now we did about the slave owner and the people that descended from slave owners. Now let's go on the other side, the other flip side. Before we calculate reparations, we also have to know the data points and the facts and the stats on the slaves, on the slave side, right? Now we know that on the other side there was white slave owners, there was Asian slave owners, there was black slave owners. But what about on the slave side? Well, there were white slaves, there were Asian slaves, and there were black slaves. It's the same thing. Obviously, the blacks were predominant, and they were the ones that took off, and they were the ones that we kept for, you know what I mean. Again, though, if you take immigration into consideration, very little of the black population is actually descended from slaves. And I'm going to tell you this right now. I bet you $1 million that there are more white Irish Americans today, that the white people that descended from Ireland, right? Their parents came over. But they came over, during slave times in the United States or America. There are more of those descendants of those white slaves than there are black people that have descended from black slavery. That's just, I don't know, I'm just guessing on that, but yeah, I think so. I think it's very close, because maybe I'll get back onto that because I'm kind of high or whatever. I can't remember why. Okay, so anyways, only 89% of blacks were actually slaves in the United States, right? Back when, they had slaves. This is according to the census 1 year before the Civil War, so 1860. 89% of blacks were slaves. 11% of blacks were not slaves. Okay. Now remember, what's our mathematical rule when it comes to ratios and proportions? if the proportion stays the same, the percentage stays the same. Meaning, if you have 11%, if you have the black population right here, right, and 11% are free, and 89% are slaves, if everyone in that black population procreates at the same rate, and why wouldn't they? You know what I mean? Then as the population grows, it doesn't matter. The proportions will stay the same, right? When you get over here, 11% of the black population will be descended from people who were slaves, and 11% would be descended of no slaves, and 89% would be descended from slaves. The same percentage, no matter what, just like when we did with the whites on the slave owners. Well, this is the same. So today, if we didn't take anything into consideration other than procreation, right? That means today only 89%, only 89%, not 100%. Only 89% of the black population have actually descended from slaves. Okay, and if you take into consideration that most of the rich black people are descended from black people who were never slaves, they were actually probably slave owners. Rich people don't procreate as fast as poor and middle class. So obviously the 11% that weren't slaves, they're the rich people, right? They're the ones who owned black slaves. You know what I mean? They procreated at a slower rate, right? Wait, so where was I at? I just lost my chain of thought. I hate that. Don't do drugs. That's what happens when you get old. Then you got no short-term memory. But anyways, my point was that the 100% went down to 89%. And okay, I Googled this today, just now, right before I started this video. I Googled what... Maybe I actually have it on here. Oh, okay. Is 21% of the USA black population immigrants? Okay. And the reason why that's weird. Why did I say 21%? Because I already knew. I just wanted to double check. So I did that, and what's the answer? Yes, 21% of the black population in the United States is made up of immigrants or children of immigrants. So 2 generations. If you were, so what do you understand that that's like almost 1 out of every 4 black people are not, are not from slave times, that they were never slaves in the United States. Their ancestors never slaves. Never. They couldn't have been if they immigrated here, and they still speak, they're the actual first immigrant. They couldn't have ancestors. Same way with the kids of immigrants. If your parent, came from another country and they're the first immigrant, you know what I mean? You can't have any ancestors. It's not possible for your ancestors if you just got here 1 generation ago, right? Keep in mind, that's just 2 generations of people. The guy who came over and his kid. His kid that was born after he came over. But I want you to remind you that it's 9 generations ago since we had slavery, man. You figure it's been 160 years, right, since slavery. A generation is, what, 20 years, you can say? Because every 20 years, you got a new, you have kids. And those kids get up, they're about 20, and they have kids. And then they, so 1 generation is 20 years. And really, a generation is probably about 18 years, I would say. Because most people have kids right out of high school, man. But let's say 20. 160 years, that means 8 generations. That's just to get to the line where they stopped slavery. Now, if you want to go into the slavery, you got to go 1 more generation. That's 9 generations. And they're telling me on Google, just just the last 2 generations has created 21% of the black population to be immigrants. 1/4, almost, or 1/5, more than 1/5, less than 1/4, somewhere in between there, right? Almost 1/4 of the black people in our country just got here the last 2 generations. And there's 7 generations before that. And you're telling me that there's a lot of black people that are descended from people from slaves? I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. But let's just say, okay, obviously these last 2 generations are recent, and that takes up 21% of the black population. I would think that the previous 7 generations compared to 2, you're going to at least you're going to at least have 50% of the population, you know what I mean, are now people that came in after, after slavery was abolished. So we were at 100%. We took it down to 11% because the original, back in 1865, 11% of the people weren't slaves. So that means 11% of the population today wouldn't be slaves. So we take that down to 89%. Then we take it down minus 21% all the way down to 68%. Because as we said, 25% of the black population today is just immigrants from the last 2 generations, basically. Now we're down to 68%. Now we take down another 50%, right? Because we're talking about 7 generations before those 10 generations. 68 minus 50, that's 18%. 18%. I think it's lower than that because I'm not taking into a lot of consideration a lot of things. All right? So we're down to 18%. What are our problems with this? Oh, wait, where am I at? Where's my problems with this, with the slave part of it? Again, same way on the other side with the slave owners. You have mixed races. What about them? You might have a white parent and a black parent, and the black parent goes back to slavery, and the white parent goes back to slave owner. Asians and whites were slaves. That's a problem. It's not a problem. You just got to put it into your math calculations. We'll figure that out at the end because it's very easy to do the specific calculations that you need to get all these taken care of in your math. What about when you're black but you've descended from slave owners? What if you're white and you are descended from slaves? Because there were white slaves. There are millions of combinations here that you've got to think about that it could be. You know what I mean? What if you're black but what if you're mixed race? Both of your ancestors still go back to being slaves or having slaves. There's so many whatevers. What if you're Hispanic? Hispanics don't seem to have. I'm sure they had slaves, but I don't think there are that many. They were even less than the Asians, man. Hispanics, But yeah, you got to take them into consideration. Okay. So what do we know so far? Our data we collected or whatever. What are the main things that we know? We know that 96% of the country doesn't even descend from slavery. Okay, 96%. Don't even have nothing to do with it. Ain't have any descendants that had slaves. 96% of the country. At most, we also know at most 15 to 20% of black people are descended from slaves. Or you can say less than 3%, like 2.8% of the entire country is descended from slaves. Okay, so let's say this, let's condense this. I'm going to repeat myself. 96% of people in the United States had nothing to do, aren't related to slave owners. And only 3% of the people in the country have actually been descended from slaves. So we're talking about 3% and 4% of the population that were slave owners or slaves or descended from it.